Okay, so we're back with lesson 3. So we've set up our movie details page to include our genre, but we need to make one other little change to this option tag to make the code complete. So this does display the movie name, but we also want to use, it displays the genre name, but we also want to include the genre ID as the value. So along with each movie, we're not going to save the genre name, we're going to save the genre ID. And you might say, why are we saving the ID? Well, let's remember our table. We're actually storing the genre as an integer. Okay, so it's referencing the ID number from the genres table. And the reason for this is the genre name can change, but the ID can't change. So we should be linking them based on the ID number rather than the genre name. The end user is going to see and pick the genre name, but in the back end, behind the scenes, we actually want to store the genre ID. So we're going to add one little addition here, which is going to make our syntax messy and complex. I'll put it in the chat. I knew you'd fix it, Belinda. So I'm going to add this value equals, and I'm going to close my single quote here. And we're going to append on the genre ID. And actually, there's a double quote here. I missed that. And a double quote here, because HTML attributes should all be enclosed in double quotes. So I'll put this line in the chat. So each HTML option has a value attribute. So the users don't see the genre ID, but the form will capture this ID. The user sees the name, but behind the scenes, we're actually going to store the ID number, because that's what we need for the database. So I'll show you how this renders in the browser. I know the syntax is messy. Shrink this down. So I've modified line 35. So, whoops. Obviously, I've done something wrong because I've broken it. What did I do? Oh, I took out my password, is what I did. Before I upload it to Git. So my form looks the same as it did before, but if I view the source now, you'll notice along with each option, we've now got the corresponding genre ID displayed as the value. So comedy's 1, drama's 2, sci-fi's 3, and horror is 4. So when we save a new movie, we want to save this value. So now our form is done. So we now need to modify the save page so that when we're saving a movie, we can also include this genre ID. So every movie will be attached to a genre that the user picks. So we're going to open up our save movie page from last week. And we're going to make a few additions and one change. We need to now include the genre ID when we are capturing the form input. So last week we had 3 inputs, title, rating, release here. Our form now also includes our drop-down list, which we call genre ID. So I'm going to add line 13. So this will allow us to capture the user's selection in the drop-down list. So Spencer, I'm coming to your question now because you were thinking ahead. Yes, Karen, you need to tell them that your credentials do not work, that you have tried them and I have tried them and we cannot log in with that credential. So now I'm going to update the credentials. I want to use my AWS database if I can. If you can't use AWS and you're working locally today, then you can leave this alone. So I'm going to update the database connection with our AWS host and then my credentials. So what do we need to do here? We're now going to need to modify. So I've added line 13. We've changed the database connection. Our next change is going to be on line 20. What should we do on line 20? We need to add something here. What do we need to add to our insert statement? Right, thank you, Daniel. So we need to add it in Shawshank. We need to add it to our list of fields, right? We're also inserting, and just break this into 2 lines. We're going to add comma genre ID here. And likewise, we'll add a colon genre ID parameter. So previously we had 3 values going into 3 columns. We've now got 4 values. And then we need to add one more thing here. What else should I add and where? Yeah, you got it, Sarah. So again, if we're creating a genre ID parameter, right, we want to bind it to the genre ID variable. We want to fill it. If we don't, then the genre ID will be null, and that will throw an error because we've said the genre ID is required. You can't save a movie without the genre ID. And this is going to be an integer because, again, we're saving the ID number. So like the release year, our title and rating are strings, but our release year and genre ID are integers. Okay. So we've created the movies table in AWS, right? That was that script I put on Blackboard, that SQL script 2. I'm just going to go back to Blackboard for a moment. I'll come back. I will put the code back up. Don't panic. So when we ran this script, it created the table in AWS, but it's empty, right? There are no movies in here yet. So make sure you've executed the create table movie script, this lesson 3 SQL script 2. So I've already run it here. So make sure you paste it in. If I want to check my movies table now, I'll run select star from movies, and it should be empty. I've got the table, but there's no data in it. The movies we saved last week, that was in our local database. So when I run a select query, notice there are no movies here. This table's brand new. We just created it today. So I'm going to go and try out our updated movie details and save movie page. And I want to see if I can save a movie to AWS. And if I do, that movie should also include the genre ID. Okay, so we've added line 13. We've updated our database connection. We've modified our SQL command to include the genre ID column and parameter. And then as Sarah recommended, we need to bind and fill the genre ID. So I'm going to go and try this out and see if I can actually save a movie now and whether the genre that I pick is attached to it appropriately. If your save button disappears, then there is an error here. If you right-click and view the source, you're probably going to see an error message that stops the code from the HTML from executing. So you likely have an error, which you can see from viewing the page source on your form. So I'm going to try and create a movie, and then I'll check in my database and see if the movie gets inserted. Okay, if you have undefined array key, then Joshua, you need to check. If you run the query select star from genres, you need to make sure you've got a genre ID in your database. Saying undefined array key, that suggests it's not recognizing this column. Either that or you may just have a syntax error here. I'll put the line, okay, good. I'll put this line of code in the chat again. You might just have a small error in that line. So I'm going to fill out a movie. I'm going to pick drama and try to save it. I get movie saved. Now I can go to Workbench and I can see, is this movie actually here? And does it should have genre ID of 2. So I'm going to highlight my query here that says select star for movies and run it. And now I've got movie ID 1000. My image is null. That's okay. We're not including image for today. And now I've got genre ID of 2. Okay, Belinda, that describes exactly what happened. You have not created the movies table. This base table is not found. So you have probably not executed this script in your database. So you can't save a movie because there is no movies table. Yes. Just pasting it in doesn't run it. You have to click execute for the SQL command to actually work. So I'm going to go and add a couple other movies. So I'm going to add a second drama. So now I've got 2 dramas. I'll add a third movie. Okay, if it's saying release year cannot be null, then it's not filling the release year. Okay, few people reporting errors. Give me a moment. I'm going to add one more movie and then we'll look at some of the errors. Not sure if this is the right year, maybe 1986. I'm going to add a comedy. So now in my database, I've got 3 different movies. 2 of them are dramas, and 1 of them is a comedy. Okay. Spencer, you're getting release year cannot be null. So that means hopefully if I could get to my tabs. If you're getting release year cannot be null, you need to make sure that this release year is being filled properly. So you may just have a typo somewhere. So make sure all of these say release year in camel case. Your post field, your variable, your parameter, they should all be the same. Sarah, invalid parameter number. Okay, that's a common error. We're all going to have it. I'm going to create that error. Invalid parameter number means we've got 4 parameters here in our SQL. Right? Each one is prefixed with a colon. That tells us it's a parameter. If we have 4 parameters, we must have 4 bind param statements. If you declare a parameter, you have to fill it. So that invalid parameter number means one of these parameters is not being populated with a bind param statement. Daniel, how come when we run select, the number after movies goes up? Daniel, you mean here? Oh, this is just the number of commands that have been run. This is just Workbench numbering the commands. That's all. Every time I execute a command here, Workbench tracks it in the output. Oh, because this was the 9th. It's just Workbench. That number doesn't mean anything. I think it's just the number of times maybe that query's been run. It's not really significant. So I've got 3 movies in my database now. No problem. You know what? We're learning, right? The syntax is very unforgiving. So it's frustrating to get these errors, but that's how we learn the syntax, right? You know, I've been teaching this course how many times, and I made a mistake that Hamid pointed out, that I wrote the code and I forgot to execute my query. So it's just normal that we spend a lot of our time debugging. And PHP does force us to be very detail-oriented from a syntax perspective. So I want to build one more page. Okay. So Josh, and that tells you, yeah. Okay, so here's the problem. Josh and I can. So remember, it's case sensitive. So the problem is, in your SQL query, your column is called genre ID, but it says it's referencing genre ID all lowercase. Genre ID is in camel case. So there's a problem. You need to drop the movies table and run the create movies table script again. Because when you created it, the reference is not, this column name doesn't exist all in lowercase. So Josh, and here's what you need to do. Let's create a new query tab. First, you need to drop table movies. You're going to delete the table, and you need to run this script again. So I would just execute this whole thing. And notice here, this is camel case. Okay, Tyler, make sure on your form, make sure you've got this value equals and that your select, you've also got the name. If you miss the name attribute, then the genre ID will be null, right? It will look fine in the browser, but the next page, it can't read the dropdown if you miss or mistype the name attribute. So it's possible, Tyler, that you're missing the name attribute. So your form looks fine, but the save page is looking for something called genre ID, which doesn't exist. So I want to create one more page for today, and then you do have a lab for homework to practice with this. What we want to do is we want to create a movies page that will display this list in a grid of rows and columns. And then later on, users will be able to click on a movie and either edit it or delete it. But for today, we just want to create a read-only page that runs a query, fetches all the movies, and shows the title, rating, release year. For now, we just want to show those three columns. We'll worry about the other columns later. So I'm going to make one more page for today. Yep. There you go. Aha, okay, great. Good, people are fixing stuff. That's excellent. We're just going to call this movies.php. This is going to be a page where we display a list of the movies. So we'll put our kind of boilerplate HTML here that just says movies. We will want to add CSS to this. I don't think we're going to have time today. We've done a lot today, so we'll leave that. We'll add it, some styling, sometime in the next few weeks. We'll just put on an H1 here that says movies. If I load movies.php in the browser, the only thing we should see so far is a heading. So this is how the page looks right now. We want it to look something like this. A header row, and then the movie data in rows and columns. So we're going to start with an HTML table. And we'll put on a head row and a TR for table row. And for now, we're going to have 3 columns. So we'll put on 3 headings. Title. T-head is table header. What do we have? Rating and release year. So it looks like this so far. We'll add styling to this later. I guess for now, just to make it a little easier to read. I know Visual Studio Code's complaining about this tag, it's putting it in red, but we'll use CSS to format this later on. So after our header, we want to use a query and a loop to fetch the movie data and display. I mean, we'll deal with the genre later. It's a little more complex because right now for genre, we only have the IDs, and the IDs aren't meaningful, right? We want to show the genre name. So we're going to have to join the tables together for that query, which we'll do later, but not today. It's a little more complicated. So we'll just keep it simple for today. So remind me, we will add the genre table, but not now. Sometime over the next few weeks. So now we're going to open PHP tags because for the body of our table, right, we want to create a new row. We want to create a new row for each movie. So after our header, whoops, sorry, I put this in the wrong place. My table header should close first. Sorry. And then we actually use a tBody tag. And our PHP goes inside of the table body. So now we're going to repeat a lot of the same code we've already written twice. We want to connect to the database. We want to set up a query. Except this time, instead of querying the genres, we're going to query the movies table. We're going to execute the query and store the data, and then we're going to use a loop to display a grid of rows and columns. If you're getting tired of typing this, good. It means you're probably internalizing how the PDO connection works. What SQL command should we run for this page to fetch the data we want to show? We will use fetch all, but first we need the SQL command. What instruction? Thank you, Mark. Select star from which table? So select all rows from, struggling. Which table do we want to query? Thank you, Tyler, right? We want to get all the movies. Now we set up our command. Again, we call prepare, execute, and then fetch all. So I'll create a movies variable. That gets all the data and stores it into an array of movies. So just like we've done on our genres page and our movie details page, we're going to use a for each loop. But again, the HTML formatting is going to be different this time. On the genres page, we used UL and LI. On our movie details form, we use select an option. Here we want to use TR and TD for creating table rows and table columns. So we will loop through records, new row for each record, new column for each value. So we're going to call each individual record will be a movie singular. So first we want to create, for each movie, we want to create a new row using a TR tag. And then inside each row, we're going to create a TD. So that stands for table data. That just means a cell. And in the first cell of each row, we're going to print the movie title. We'll try it just like this first. We will add the rating and release year next. But if I run the code this way, it should at least display the movie titles in the first column. My second and third column, those are going to be blank. So for each movie, make a new row, make a new column, put the movie title inside, close the column, end the row. Let's check the output here. So my other cells are blank, but our movie titles show up in the first column. To complete the table, I'll just add in 2 more columns. In the second column, I'm going to print the rating. And in the third column, we'll print the release year. And when our loop is done, let's disconnect. We don't need our database connection anymore once it prints out all the movies. So all this code, again, it's just repeating what we've already done. Connect, set up a query, prepare it, execute it, store it, and then we loop. I strongly recommend, I don't know if you're using one monitor, if you're only using your laptop, you really need to get a second screen. It's too difficult, I agree. You really should have 2 screens. One so you can see my WebEx screen, even if you have to buy a used one for $50. I know when I've been doing online coding tutorials, it's virtually impossible without a second screen. It's really a requirement to be able to learn effectively online. I don't know how it's possible on a laptop screen only. Even if you have to use a television for class. That's a limit. That's the best suggestion I have, is to have a second monitor. It's really not possible to do this. Pretty much any computer will support 2 monitors. Or if you have a television, you just need an HDMI cable, which probably costs $15. I mean, I have a really old junky monitor. Yes. So now when I refresh, now my grid is populating. Yep, look on Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace. As long as it has an HDMI port, your laptop should have an HDMI port. Okay. If things are showing up and not in the right place, it's just a question of getting your HTML tags right. I'll push my code up in just a moment. Okay, Spencer, give it a minute. It just looks like your connection to the server died. Give it a minute and try to refresh it. So now whatever movies are in the database are going to show up on this page. I'll go and save a new movie here. So if I go to my movie details page and add something else, so I'll add one more drama. And now if I refresh my movies page, my new movie instantly shows up. So every time I load my movies page, it will give us a current snapshot of what's in the database. So even though we have no styling, there's no links, no way to navigate between the pages, we have the workings of the starting building blocks of a working dynamic website, right? Where we can manage the genres and manage the movie data. We can create data with our forms and save pages, and we can display data using fetch all and our for each loop. So we can display data in a dropdown. We can also display data in a table format. And yeah, it needs some styling, needs some love, needs a navigation bar. We will add all of those things. And Hamid is going to remind us, we'll also want to show the genres here. Okay, I'm going to upload all of my code. So here's what we're going to do. It's 10:40. This was all the coding we wanted to do today. I know it was a lot. Again, the more you work with this, the better you're going to get at it. If you are behind, yep, Sarah, we could. Absolutely, because the ratings probably don't change. There's pretty much a static category. So yeah, we could. I don't know if we'll have time to do it, but yeah, in fact, you could try that if you wanted to. You could add a ratings table, and you could rework this to display it as a dropdown if you wanted to. It's a great idea. So I will upload my code to Git in just a minute for reference. Okay, if you're getting base table, so that's the same error. It's saying your table does not exist. So make sure you run the create table command in Workbench. You can't save to the movies table or display from the movies table if that table doesn't exist here. You should have a movies table here. So you'll need to run the create table script. Sorry, there is one more last thing I'm going to do, which is publish this to AWS. I know you would have done this in your HTML class. So you need to set your connection up. The instructions are on Blackboard on how to do it, but I know you would have done it last semester. The instructions are here, again, in links and resources. Here's how to set up your connection in Filezilla. Well, there won't be any values. You have to now fill out your form and save the movies. If there's no movies in the database, there won't be any data showing up here. You'll now have to fill out your form and add some data. So in Filezilla, you can store your connection through the site manager. You open up Filezilla or CyberDuck. I know Scott used CyberDuck. If you go to your site manager and click on New Site, you can put in your AWS credentials. For the host, again, I believe it's the same. Just double check. Yeah, same. So you'll put in the host, 172, and you change the login type to normal. And then you put in your AWS username and password. Okay, Belinda, because you've spelled it ID with a capital D. That's not in camel case. The column is called genre ID in camel case, but you've referenced yours with a capital D. So remember, it's case sensitive. So once you add your credentials, you should be able to connect. So you can connect, and then I'm going to open up my public HTML, and I'm going to upload my whole PHP Flix folder from XAMPP, htdocs. Yes, Jose, you should. But remember, your account from last semester got deleted. They reset them, so you'll just have to modify the credentials. So if you go to Site Manager, you can get it from last semester, but you'll need to modify it and put in your new password and new username if everything's changed. And now I should be able to load my site at lamp.computerstudies, and then the tilde character. So now my page is running on AWS. And again, the instructions for this are on Blackboard. You don't have to do this right now. You can always watch this part of the video and do it later. Yeah, well, it's all here. It'll be in the video recording. Okay, and all the instructions are here, and it tells you how to access your pages. Okay, yes, the path to the XAMPP file is right here. XAMPP htdocs. And then there's our PHP Flix folder. Well, I'll upload the video a little bit later. So if you prefer the video walkthrough, that's fine. It'll be on YouTube in a bit. I will upload all my code shortly, so if you're not getting the right results, you can compare your code to mine. But I want to go over lab 1. Yes, Belinda, upload the whole PHP Flix folder to Filezilla. So here when I connected, I was in htdocs. I just dragged my entire PHP Flix folder inside of public HTML. It has to go inside of this to be visible in the browser. So I've got public HTML and PHP Flix is here. So lab 1. Yeah, because Daniel, index is the default. You manually have to load. We have no links or navigation right now. So add movies.php to the end. Without any URL, it defaults to index. So if you want the movies page, you have to explicitly go there. We'll add links soon, but not yet. Okay, so here is your lab. Using your AWS, yes, Sunday. Why does it say February 6th? If it does, I'll change that. Thank you. Yes. 1 week is plenty of time, so. Thanks, Jose. So you're going to connect to your AWS database. You're going to run the command use with your database name, and then you're going to execute this command. Create table relatives. So you're going to copy and paste, replace this. So you're going to build a relatives table in the database. You're then going to use Workbench and run this command. Insert into, and you're going to run this command for each of the members of your family. So put in their first name, their age, and their occupation. If you want, you can add pets. So add your parents, so whoever's in your family, your nuclear family. If you want to include grandparents and pets, go right ahead. And then you're going to build one PHP page that's going to look very similar to the movies page. And it's going to show the name of your relative, their age, and their occupation. You're then going to upload them. So you're going to call the page lab1.php. You're going to upload it to the server. So the URL will look like this. And you'll just replace username here with your AWS username. On Blackboard, you're going to upload your PHP file and also include the link to your page. So I can click the link and run your lab in the browser. Yes, Andres, if you want to use your own. Belinda, no, you don't need a form. You can run this insert command directly in Workbench. Just copy and paste it and execute it. One time for each person. So you don't need a form. We're going to insert the data directly in Workbench. You don't have to make a form and save page for the lab. Okay, so if this was me, I would do something like this. So I'd put in, I'd put in the names. So just put in the names. You just click File, New Query tab. Right here, File, New Query tab, it opens a new one. So you can just copy and paste that line and put in people's names. And then you just execute. But you've got to run this first, right? You have to create the table before you can insert into it. So your lab is due Sunday at midnight. I have office hours, appointments you can book. If you need the booking link, it is on Blackboard. It's both in the syllabus and it's under faculty info. I have appointments available. There's more times I think available on Wednesday, so feel free to book an appointment. I will post today's YouTube video and today's code shortly.